"I killed my wife for you." These 6 chilling words, spoken by Baptist minister Matt Baker to his mistress, shattered the suicide narrative he'd carefully constructed around his wife's death. For more than a year, he'd convinced an entire community that Kari had taken her own life. What began as a grieving husband's story of finding his wife dead beside a typed suicide note would transform into one of the most shocking cases of premeditated murder by a clergyman in Texas history. The evidence was buried in computer searches, phone records, and ultimately, in Kari Baker's own exhumed body, revealing a truth far darker than anyone in his congregation could have imagined. The clock struck midnight on April 7, 2006, when Baptist minister Matt Baker frantically called 911 from his suburban Texas home. His voice trembled as he reported finding his wife Kari unresponsive after returning from a late-night trip to the video store. Emergency responders arrived to a scene that appeared tragically straightforward. A grieving mother who had finally succumbed to depression years after losing her daughter to cancer, with wine coolers and an empty bottle of sleeping pills nearby. The typed suicide note seemed to confirm the narrative. Case closed, but appearances can be devastatingly deceptive, especially when crafted by someone who understands exactly what authorities expect to see. As we reflect on this real-life story, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell for more daily stories that need to be heard. Hit that subscribe button, and let us hear from you in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Now let's continue. When Hewitt police officers arrived at the Baker home that night, they found themselves face-to-face with a respected community leader, a Baptist preacher whose position commanded immediate trust. The officers' natural deference to Baker's status created a dangerous blind spot. They saw what they expected to see: a grieving husband shocked by tragedy, not a calculating killer carefully staging a crime scene. The suicide note discovered at the scene contained multiple grammatical errors that should have raised immediate red flags. Kari Baker, a schoolteacher known for her meticulous writing, would never have made such mistakes. Yet investigators accepted the letter without question, failing to perform even basic handwriting analysis. The presence of alcohol and sleeping pills completed the suicide narrative, hiding what was truly a calculated murder in plain sight. Perhaps most disturbing were the critical investigative steps never taken. No autopsy was ordered, a stunning oversight that would later prove nearly catastrophic to achieving justice. The justice of the peace declared the death a suicide within hours, a hasty conclusion that overlooked troubling inconsistencies, including lividity patterns on Kari's body that contradicted Matt's timeline of events. When her body was discovered, the blood had pooled in ways indicating she had been positioned differently than how Matt claimed to have found her. Baker masterfully reinforced the suicide narrative by exploiting their family's previous tragedy. He repeatedly told investigators that Kari had never recovered from the death of their daughter Cassidy years earlier from a brain tumor. This compelling backstory provided a convenient explanation that few questioned, despite Kari's friends and family insisting she had been moving forward with her life. While publicly playing the devastated widower, Baker's private actions told a different story. Within days of Kari's death, he began removing her photographs from their home, telling his daughters they were ready for a new mother. This jarring behavior went unquestioned by authorities who had already closed the case. The first significant crack in Baker's carefully constructed facade appeared when investigators finally examined Kari's Bible. Inside, they discovered a handwritten note, dated just days before her death, pleading with God for protection from Matt. This chilling message stood in stark contrast to the supposed suicide note found at the scene. That haunting prayer in Kari's Bible wasn't the only ominous message reaching out from beyond the grave. When James Doolin opened his daughter's phone bill weeks after her funeral, what he saw made his blood run cold. Dozens of calls made from Kari's cell phone, long after she had been buried. These strange little hints, as James would later describe them, transformed grieving parents into reluctant detectives, forced to question everything they thought they knew about their daughter's death. Initially, the Doolins had accepted the suicide narrative, overwhelmed by the shock and grief that followed Kari's sudden passing. But as the fog of mourning began to clear, disturbing inconsistencies emerged. When confronted about the mysterious phone activity, Matt Baker offered an explanation that seemed plausible on the surface. He had given Kari's phone to Vanessa Bulls, a recently divorced woman who needed it for church purposes. Yet something about this explanation didn't sit right with the Dolans. Their suspicions intensified as they observed Matt's behavior following their daughter's death. The swift removal of Kari's photos and his comments about finding a new mother for his daughters clashed dramatically with the actions of a genuinely grieving husband. Then came another bombshell. Kari's therapist reached out to reveal that before her death, Kari had confided fears that Matt was having an affair. The pieces of a troubling puzzle were beginning to align. When the Dolans approached the Hewitt Police Department with their concerns, they hit a wall of indifference. The case was closed, they were told. Suicide, end of story. Authorities showed no interest in reconsidering their hasty conclusion, leaving the family frustrated and increasingly desperate. It became clear that if justice was to be served, the Dolans would need to forge their own path. Help arrived in the form of attorney Bill Johnston, who recognized the glaring deficiencies in the original investigation. Johnston devised a strategic approach, filing a wrongful death lawsuit against Matt Baker. This legal maneuver wasn't merely about financial compensation. It was a brilliant tactical move that would force Baker to provide testimony under oath and surrender critical evidence. Texas Ranger Matt Cawthon also joined their cause, bringing professional skepticism to bear on a case that local authorities had prematurely dismissed. The wrongful death lawsuit quickly bore fruit. When ordered to surrender his personal computer and printer for forensic examination, Baker suddenly claimed both devices had mysteriously stopped working and had been discarded. This convenient technological failure, occurring precisely when the devices might have yielded evidence, struck the Dolans and their legal team as far too coincidental. The destruction of evidence is often the most damning evidence of all. When Matt Baker claimed his personal devices had mysteriously broken down, just as investigators came calling, he unwittingly drew attention to what he was desperately trying to hide. But like many criminals who believe themselves cleverer than they are, Baker failed to realize that digital footprints rarely disappear completely. Investigators soon turned their attention to a source he hadn't thought to purge: his work computer at the Waco Center for Youth. What they discovered painted a chilling portrait of premeditation. Hidden beneath the veneer of godliness were internet searches that revealed Baker's true character and intentions. There, in black and white, were queries for overdosing on sleeping pills, alongside pornographic material, a startling contradiction to the pious image he projected to his congregation and community. These weren't just casual searches. They were the digital breadcrumbs of a murder in the making. Even more damning was the evidence that Baker had ordered Ambien, a powerful sedative, from an offshore pharmacy just 1 month before Kari's death. This wasn't some innocent purchase. Kari had no prescription for the drug, and Baker had gone to considerable lengths to obtain it through channels that wouldn't raise suspicion. The timing of this purchase, combined with his internet searches, suggested something far more sinister than a grieving widower's attempt to cope with loss. But these digital discoveries, while compelling, couldn't stand alone. Investigators needed physical evidence to connect Baker's online activities to Kari's death. 3 months after she was laid to rest, authorities made the difficult decision to exhume her body. The process would be complicated by embalming, which made traditional blood testing impossible. Yet forensic experts persevered, focusing their attention on muscle tissue samples that might still contain traces of substances present at the time of death. Their persistence paid off in a revelation that changed everything. Tests confirmed the presence of Ambien in Kari's muscle tissue, the very drug her husband had secretly ordered. This wasn't just coincidence, it was the smoking gun. Kari, who had no prescription for Ambien, had somehow ingested the substance before her death. The implication was clear: someone had drugged her, and only one person had both the motive and the means. This discovery transformed the case. More than a year after initially ruling Kari's death, a suicide, the Justice of the Peace amended the cause to undetermined, a critical step toward justice. The pieces were falling into place, creating a damning picture of calculated murder. Baker's internet searches for overdosing information, his secretive purchase of Ambien, and the drug found in Kari's body formed a triangle of evidence that pointed to only one conclusion. A single witness can transform a case from circumstantial to concrete. While the physical evidence against Matt Baker was compelling, prosecutors knew that without someone who could speak to his intentions, a conviction might slip through their fingers. When Vanessa Bulls stepped forward from the shadows of Baker's secret life, she didn't just fill in missing pieces of the puzzle. She revealed the full, horrific picture of premeditated murder. Prosecutors made a strategic choice that would prove devastating for Baker's defense. They granted Bulls complete immunity in exchange for her testimony. What followed was what one prosecutor would later describe as a nuclear bomb in their case. Testimony so explosive it would shatter Baker's carefully constructed facade of innocence. Bulls' admissions on the stand systematically dismantled Baker's claims. Their affair, she revealed, had begun well before Kari's death, establishing a powerful motive for murder. But more chilling were the revelations about Baker's multiple attempts to end his wife's life. Bulls testified that Baker had considered several murder scenarios, staging a hanging, tampering with Kari's car brakes, and even planning a fake drive-by shooting. His determination to eliminate his wife was matched only by his cold calculation. The courtroom fell silent as Bulls recounted how Baker had previously attempted to poison Kari's drink, only to be thwarted when his wife complained it tasted like lead. This wasn't an impulsive crime of passion, but a methodical campaign to end a marriage that stood in the way of his desires. When Bulls finally detailed the night of Kari's murder, the full horror of Baker's actions came into focus. Under the guise of intimate relations, Baker had handcuffed his unsuspecting wife to their bed, administered Ambien to render her unconscious, and then deliberately smothered her with a pillow. The clinical execution of his plan revealed a man utterly divorced from human compassion. Perhaps most disturbing was Baker's behavior immediately after taking his wife's life. Bulls testified that Baker had described kissing Kari's forehead, saying, "Give Cassidy a kiss for me," invoking their deceased daughter in a moment of unimaginable cruelty that left many in the courtroom visibly shaken. Throughout the trial, Baker continued his public performance of innocence, giving interviews and appearing on magazine covers while maintaining support from segments of his community. But as Bulls' testimony progressed, even his most steadfast defenders began to question their faith in the seemingly devout minister. Then came the 6 words that sealed Baker's fate. Bulls testified that when she had attempted to end their relationship, Baker had made a confession that eliminated any doubt about his guilt. "I killed my wife for you." With this statement, the prosecution's case was no longer built solely on forensic evidence, but on Baker's own admission relayed through his mistress. The jury delivered their verdict with decisive clarity. After just 8 hours of deliberation, Matt Baker was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 65 years behind prison walls. His carefully crafted facade of innocence, the grieving widower, the devoted minister, had finally crumbled under the weight of evidence and testimony. The punishment phase revealed a shocking pattern that had lurked beneath the surface for years. 12 women stepped forward to testify about Matt's inappropriate sexual advances, exposing predatory behavior that had been concealed by his ministerial position. As prosecutor Kelly Siegler powerfully stated, "Those women had a right to be angry, they had a right to be heard, and I'm glad they were." Their collective testimony painted the portrait of a man who had long exploited his position of trust. Today, Matt Baker continues serving his sentence, with parole eligibility not possible until 2042. Kari's tragic story stands as a testament to how persistence, forensic evidence, and one person's courage to speak the truth can pierce through even the most elaborate deceptions. Though justice arrived late for Kari Baker, it arrived nonetheless, proving that some secrets cannot remain buried forever.